It'll be first and 25. First and 25. First and 25. First and 25.
This is First and 25, the Football Zebras podcast, our 25-minute roundtable discussion on officiating with the Football Zebras crew. And we have Mark Schultz, Cam Filipe, Chris Seubert, and I'm Ben Austro. So let's take a quick look at some things that we have seen. One of the things that was interesting in the Saints-Panthers game, Panthers kicked a field goal. It was blocked at the line. Ball comes back behind the line, or it never actually goes beyond the neutral zone. Comes back, bounces off a few helmets and players, and eventually comes to rest in the Panthers' possession. And so then they are able to retain possession and get the first down there. So an interesting situation, and I think we've covered this axiom a lot, which is whenever the ball is kicked, funny things can happen. And so in this particular case, we see a rule that field goals, just like punts, once they cross that neutral zone, that becomes now the exclusive domain of the kickers. And so if the kicking team touches it, it's a dead ball immediately, whether or not it's a field goal, a punt, or a kickoff. And or if it's possessed by them, and but in this case, since it had not crossed the line, it is not yet a punt that has been surrendered or a field goal that has been. So scrimmage kicks fall into that category. And once again, it's knowing those rules in that moment and just reacting and essentially turning in a good play on special teams. That's when we were talking about kicks doing funny things. That means you're special teams players have to be extra well-versed in the rules, specifically on that part of the game. Mark, what do you got this week?
Well, mine is in the realm of college football. If you don't know the name Josh Dascher, get to know that name. That is the back judge who worked the Indiana versus Penn State game at Happy Valley. Indiana had never beaten Penn State at Happy Valley. They put together a last-second play in near the goal line. They threw it into the end zone right at the end line. The Indiana receiver caught it, got 1 foot barely in bounds. Josh Dascher was right on top of it. Watch the slow motion play on ground level down the end line. You see Dasher's head up in the air as he looks at the reception to make sure the ball is possessed. Then he shifts his gaze down, looking for the feet. He has the feet down inbounds, up with a nice, calm, under control touchdown signal. Dascher was the calmest person in the stadium. It reminded me of Greg Gautreau's touchdown signal on the winning touchdown catch by the Steelers in Super Bowl 43. Fantastic job, Josh Dascher. And hang a star on that one. That could be the call of the year. NFL officials have to make a couple better calls to beat that one.
So that brings us back to that axiom that we have mentioned frequently, that slow is best and not to rush these things. I mean, this is an exciting play. I mean, the officials have no skin in the game either way. No matter what, it is still an exciting play, and whatever the outcome is, you can't get caught up in that moment. You still have to process everything and slowly, and your description there was probably about 5 times as long as the actual play. So all of that combined into that moment and then making a calm signal. Yeah, absolutely. And that's what everything is, all the training is about, and getting to that point in that very moment. Cam, what did you see this week?
Yeah, so we go to Washington. We had our third disqualification of the season this year. It was Daron Payne of the Commanders who was disqualified for throwing a punch at an opponent. Happened right in front of side judge Don Willard. Very easy one to point out. and an easy one to get right and get right away. We didn't hear an announcement on the broadcast, but he was swiftly removed from the field prior to the try after a Lions touchdown. This punch occurred in the dead ball period following a touchdown for the Lions. Something else that kind of left some heads scratching and left some to improperly say that there was a second ejection on that play. His teammate, Javon Kinlaw, was also penalized for unsportsmanlike conduct. And when the replay was shown on that, there was contact with an official, it looked like. It looked like he had swatted at the brim of the cap of umpire Brandon Cruz. That, however, did not lead to a disqualification. And, some people are saying, why is that if he had made contact with the official? It reminded me of a play that occurred a little over 10 years ago in Seattle where Kendall Langford, a two-time or 3-year defensive lineman for the Rams, was disqualified for inadvertently knocking the hat off of back judge Steve Freeman. Reminded me a lot of this, but a little different this time because that was purely an accident and Langford was disqualified. In this case, it looks like we had a swat at an official directly. So there may have been some benefit of the doubt given that he may have been swatting at an opponent. So they didn't go with the more punitive penalty there. But, very, very interesting for sure. And also a note on ejections as a whole or in general. This is the third ejection of the 2025 season. And that's down from the last few years. Each of the past 3 seasons, so 2022 through 2024, there have been exactly 7 ejections through week 10. So we're actually down this year.
And we started off 6 seconds into the first game of the season with the first ejection. So the pace seemed to be quick at the very beginning, but yeah, it has slowed down significantly. And I do think that a lot of things, we don't have the statistics in front of me right now, but I'm sure you're going to look at some of the things with taunting and all of these, calls that they're making. And, if they're down, then that's also in the same area. So you're not having to tamp down. You're not getting these unnecessary penalties for unsportsmanlike or things of that nature. So we'll send it over to Germany. That's not where Chris is, but that's where his topic is.
Yeah, and I think the travel for Clete Blakeman on that game may have gotten to him a little bit. End of that game was very what I termed as disjointed for Blakeman and the crew in general. Final seconds of that game, and it was a pretty good game actually, going back and forth between the Colts and the Falcons. But there was an intentional grounding call on essentially the last play of regulation, and there's a little issue with the timing because the clock actually, I think on the broadcast said below 10 seconds, but by rule on an intentional grounding, there is a 10-second runoff unless there is a timeout still left for the offense. In this case, there was not. So it ran down and Cleat announced that, hey, there's a 10-second runoff. The game is over, which of course is confusing to all the German fans out there because the game was not over. It was going to overtime. And then he said, well, there was 11 seconds. With a 10-second runoff, there would be 1 second left. And it was clear neither the Falcons nor the Colts wanted to snap the ball again. They just wanted to get to overtime. And I think he was just literally trying to get there as well. But I think they radioed down and said, no, you have to put it down for a second, wind the clock, and then run it to 0. And that's what they're doing, right? So I think from that, he was a little bit flustered going into the coin toss because during that coin toss, he announced that the Colts were actually allowed to call the coin toss, and they were in the dark jerseys, and they were the designated home team, which, as we know, the visitors typically call the coin toss. So during the broadcast, they showed all of that, and you can actually see back judge Jonah Monroe on the way out kind of go up to Blakeman and start talking to him in earnest, like, hey, something's wrong here. And not that this is a crew saver sort of call, but it was certainly a mistake because during the commercial break, it was announced, they never showed it, but it was announced that they redid the coin toss correctly with Atlanta calling that coin toss. So I think this shows that, Blakeman is a human just like everybody else, because sometimes we get flustered with one sort of hiccup and it snowballs into multiple hiccups. And while it's not an excuse for him in any way, shape, or form, I think it does go to show that whether it's at the NFL level, college, high school, or whatever, the slower you can slow down and make sure things are correct, the more positive things are going to turn out. In this case, I think just Blakeman had a brain fart in this case, and it does happen to all of us.
And in this particular case, you have the time being added on by replay assist, and maybe we're dealing with the situation of being overseas, and the equipment is not where it was in other stadiums or whatever it might be. Everybody's adapting, but yeah, the replay assist needs to get that 11-second number down to the field before Blakeman opens the microphone, because then, that adds another layer to that. And he gets flustered. And as we say, when you get these situations where something goes a little bumpy and you fix it and you go on to the next down, you have to put that out of your mind, because the next mistake is going to be scheduled almost immediately if you allow that to occupy rent-free space in your head there. So so it was a little bumpy and disjointed, but thankfully everything got ironed out. And well, in Blakeman's case, this is the third unusual coin toss that he's been a part of. The first two really not his fault. So now we a third one that we can add to our coin toss highlight reel.
We have footage on Football Zebras on the post about that coin toss. You could see Jonah Monroe and field judge Karina Tovar, who are there with Blakeman at the coin toss. They gave each other a quick glance like, wait a minute, did he just say Colts call the toss? And then you can see Monroe kind of give one of those backhanded taps to the upper arm of Blakeman as he's doing the toss. And I don't think Monroe wanted to just jump in the middle of the coin toss and start, correcting and embarrassing Blakeman right then and there. But they tried, but they couldn't get Blakeman woed up in time.
Well, I think this goes back to when the Oscars called the wrong Best Picture, and it's like, you know what? Just stop and tell us. When something goes wrong like that, just say something. And the example that I'm thinking about relating to a coin toss is where Terry McAuley intercepted his own flip in midair and says, "Oh, well, we have to get the call before we can do the flip." So that was so Namath had one more interception to his tally after as a result of being part of that coin toss ceremony. So let's shift gears and take a look at a couple of things that we want to take a little more in-depth look at. And I had a couple of notes from the past 2 weeks, and week 9 and week 8, where we have on the roster, we have 4 former NFL players that are now officials, and they've worked their way up through college. And that there really isn't a shortcut. This is something that has been started mostly as an initiative back around the 2012, 2013, right around when there was the referee lockout, and we then started with developmental programs. One of the developmental programs that was started was getting former players involved in officiating at some of the lower levels, having them work their way up. And a few of them show up in some of the spring games, and we see them start to come up to the upper levels. I'm sure that there's some name recognition, and so it does help their advancement, I'm sure. But nonetheless, when they get to the NFL, they not only have the experience from being on an NFL field, and in some cases being on the Super Bowl winning team, and then applying that knowledge on the field and probably even helping out their crew as well.
This has been a pleasant surprise to me. When I thought that the NFL was going to approach former players and put them into the mix and recruit them to become officials, I thought, oh boy, here we go. This is a fast track. Someone's going to be retired, and in 3 years they're on the NFL field. No, they've gone and they've paid their dues. And I am not privy to their training. I am not privy to the locker room conversations or their thoughts, but they have washed all the player out of them, at least when it comes to enforcing the rules. They don't say, well, he took a swat at the other player's face mask and called him a name. I've been there. He's frustrated. We'll let it slide. Nope, they fly the flag. And they do a very, very good job. I'm very impressed with all the former officials who are all the former NFL players who have become officials. They do a very, very good job at it. And I'm proud of them.
And we've had a long history of players that have advanced, but it was not something that was really specifically an NFL initiative. It's somebody that on their own worked. And the one prominent one is that I think of is Ron Botchin, who had 4 Super Bowl rings as an official and had 1 ring as an AFL champion on the field. So he proudly displayed his 5 title rings on one hand there, and then he became one superb umpire, one of the best of all time.
So, for some historical context, this is according to the Pro Football Hall of Fame, in what I call their science fair basement exhibit of officiating, which is a topic for another episode. There have been 25 men in pro football history that have combined 15 or more years combined with officiating and playing. 25. And we have our current 4. I don't think that they've reached 15 combined just yet. But in the modern NFL, and I loosely define modern as 21st century, up until 2019, really the only 2 were back judge Steve Freeman. I've now mentioned him twice in this podcast, as well as head linesman, now called down judge Phil McKinley. We're really the only 2 in the 21st century where you'd see on the roster. And it wasn't until 2019 when we had Terry Killens and Nate Jones hired that we started to see this newer initiative. Because as you had mentioned, Ben, McKinley and Freeman and all the ones prior weren't really part of a league initiative. It was something they had decided to do once they were done playing. But you're right. You get an additional sense having been a former player. And I like to speak to Nate Jones specifically. Earlier this season, a few weeks ago, there was a moment where there was a skirmish on the sideline at a game in, I believe, Seattle. And it ended up being a Seattle player, Jackson Smith and Jigba, who was on the Houston sideline, and he was totally outnumbered. It was one Seahawk player with probably 20 or so Texans that were closing in. And a lot of times we say we want to get the dirty jerseys out of there, is what we like to say. We want to go into the crowd, pull the players that don't belong on that bench out of there. But since he was really outnumbered, Nate Jones did something really interesting where instead of trying to pull Smith and Jigba out of that huddle that was forming on the Houston sideline, he essentially just covered him up. He got essentially right on top of him and shielded him from the contact, which was something very interesting, and he received a lot of praise for it on social media. And, it's just that extra sense where, us as officials, we may first think, all right, we're going to try to pull him out of here because he doesn't belong here. With that prior playing experience, just that intuition of having been an NFL player, Jones himself was a defensive back for a handful of teams. Doing that different approach, really showed that, there's an extra sense here that an official that may not have played football, or at least at the professional level, may have compared to one that did.
And the NHL does a really good job of this too. They have a ton of ex-players that are officials now. Namely, Wes McCauley is probably one of the best referees in the NHL right now, and he's a former player. And I want to echo what Cam said, and I think there's similarities between the NHL and the NFL, right? Because they're 2 very high-speed physical games, and the amount of knowledge the player brings to that on the refereeing side is invaluable, I think. And you don't see as many. I don't think there's any in the NBA that I know of, but maybe there are. But yeah, I think the NHL has clearly shown in addition to the Hall of Fame, the NHL has done a really good job of bringing in former players.
And so that's the second little dig that we put towards Canton, which we will probably address. I guess maybe we'll make a little footnote and we'll put that next week's podcast.
I know this is a football podcast, but I just want to give some love to NHL hockey officials. You don't have to know how to hit a curveball and be a major league umpire. You don't have to know how to block and tackle in order to be an NFL referee. You don't know how to box out and be a basketball official. You have to ice skate as well as the players to be a National Hockey League referee.
Shifting gears right now, we're going to take a look at high school playoff football and something interesting that comes up with officiating mechanics. Cam, I'll let you tee that up.
Sure. So I'll give the annotated version with the time we have left. I was the white hat in a first-round playoff game last weekend. My first playoff game was a white hat. Very excited. And in my pregame meeting with the visiting coach, and I've mentioned this on prior podcasts, once you get to the postseason in Massachusetts, you can play a team from any part of the state, tip of Cape Cod to the western border with New York. It could be anywhere depending on how you're seated and what your division you're in. And this team was from a town north of Boston. And generally, the schools that I work are all south of Boston. And there are different officiating boards in different regions of the state, as there are in many others. Now, something that we generally run into when we deal with out of our region schools and coaching staffs is they may be used to slightly different mechanics from officials in their region. And the main one that I always point to specifically is how the play clock is handled. And again, this may vary across the 50 states, but my local association in Massachusetts, our back judge will put their hand up at 10 seconds. And once that 10 seconds is up, the hand's going down and they're reaching for the flag. However, other parts of our state, other officiating boards in our state, what they will do is they'll go put their hand up at 10, and then what they will do is they'll extend their arm straight out parallel to the ground at 5 to give the quarterback a heads up that there's now 5 seconds left. And we always have to tell these coaches from other parts of the state, we say, listen, we're going up at 10, and when that hand's coming down, it's not for 5, it's reaching for the flag. And I got an expression from the visiting coach last Friday of, oh, really? That's how you guys do it? And, sometimes we have to sympathize because they may be coaching their players to a certain mechanic where we now have to make sure I let my back judge know. I said, hey, let us know on the 0-2-0 when there's 10 seconds left. So I can call it out to the quarterback and the wing official can call it out to the coach just so they're aware because they are not used to this mechanic. We'll amend when we can, but we're not going to change our whole mechanics for a different team. So it speaks to something that, you may experience in a different state, in a different part of the country, where different associations in different parts of your state may have slightly different mechanics, even though your state board or your state organization is trying to push for cohesiveness.
And that doesn't usually come up too terribly often, except in the postseason for high school. Mark, if you could just kind of give us a brief overview from when Art McNally saw inconsistent mechanics across the country in the NFL, and he was able to harmonize that.
When Art McNally first took over the NFL officiating office, he would have clinics, and as he would say, the different mechanics that he would like the officials to use, he'd hear Norm Schachter or Tommy Bell or Jim Tunney say, well, my crew does it this way. There were a dozen to 14 crews, and each referee had their own set of mechanics. But McNally got everybody on board to be able to adopt the same mechanics, the same way you walk off penalties, the same way you signal to the press box, the same way, the same spacing you give. All of that stuff he got to have all the crews get on board with, and he used it through film. And a lot of the officials saw the film and they said, oh, okay, this makes sense. And now we have uniform mechanics. You watch some NFL games from the 60s and early 70s, and you're like, wow, that's a way to call a game that I haven't seen before.
And so, yeah, it does come to something where when you see something nationally broadcast, and now, at that time, film was emerging for Art McNally, and he was able to include film study, which now we just think of as take for granted that just is part of the furniture of every week. And with that, we wrap up another episode of the First and 25 podcast. Check us out on your favorite podcasting app and like and subscribe. Many thanks for listening.